Somewhere off the coast of Portugal, in the pitch dark of 1848, a British naval officer stands on deck and watches two ships converge on a collision course. No radar, no radios, just two black holes closing the distance in silence. And the only thing standing between them and a splintered wreck is a single colored pane of glass. Lit from behind by an oil flame, most people assume the answer is simple. Red and green just help sailors tell one side of the ship from the other, the way a stop sign tells a driver to stop. Left side, right side, different colors. Done. That explanation isn't wrong. It's just barely a tenth of the story, because the specific choice of red and of green, the specific side each one sits on. And the reason this exact color pairing now blinks on airplane wings and on a spacecraft docking with the International Space Station, all trace back to a chain of decisions involving glass chemistry, economics, and a piece of collision math that most sailors alive today have never had explained to them. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the color of a light on a ship at night is actually a legal command, encoded 170 years ago, that is still silently governing every ship, plane, and spacecraft on Earth. Start with the most obvious explanation. Red and green let sailors tell one side of a ship from the other in the dark. Left is different from right, and that difference could mean the difference between passing safely and colliding. This is true. It's also almost the entire explanation most people carry around for the rest of their lives, and it collapses the moment you ask a simple follow-up question. Why red and green specifically? Why not blue and yellow or white and black? A color is only useful for identification if it's arbitrary and agreed upon in advance. Any two colors would have worked, as long as everyone used the same two. So something else must have decided which colors won. Here's the second explanation people reach for. Red means danger, green means safe, just like traffic lights. It feels intuitive because we've been trained on that logic since childhood. Red light, stop. Green light, go. There's a problem hiding in that comparison. Ships were using red and green at sea in the 1840s. The standardized red and green traffic light, the one controlling intersections, wasn't installed until the 1920s in American cities. The Maritime color code came first. Whatever danger and safety mean at a four-way intersection, they were borrowed from the sea, not the other way around. The third explanation is the lazy one, and it's the one that sounds the most sophisticated. It's just tradition. Old sailors did it, so new sailors kept doing it, and eventually it calcified into law. This one is closer to true than the first two, but it still leaves the actual mechanism completely dark. Tradition doesn't explain why a specific habit, out of hundreds of possible habits, was the one selected to survive. Before 1848, different fleets experimented with different combinations. Some vessels ran a single white light and trusted lookouts to shout warnings across open water. Others tried colored signals with no fixed side assignment at all, leaving captains to guess which flank they were looking at. None of those variations survived contact with international shipping. Only one pairing did dot. So ask yourself the question a good investigator would ask at this point. Out of every lighting scheme competing for dominance in the early 1800s, what tipped the scale toward this one, and locked it in so completely that a version of it now guides an uncrewed spacecraft toward a space station? Something made red in port and green and starboard the winning combination out of a much larger field of competitors. To find that reason, you have to go back to a much smaller, much stranger detail. What colored glass actually cost in the 19th century? Here's the layer nobody puts in the summary. This entire global safety system was shaped, in its earliest form, by a supply chain problem. Long before red and green were law, harbors already used colored lantern glass to mark their boundaries. And of the colors available to glassmakers at the time, red was the cheap one. It was the color you got from common, inexpensive additives, and it was already sitting in Port Authority storerooms marking the edges of harbor entrances. Green glass existed, but it was harder to produce and more expensive to acquire. Think about what that meant in practice. If you're a harbor master in the early 1800s, deciding how to mark the entrance to your port at night, and red glass is sitting on the shelf while green glass requires a special order, you use the red glass. You don't hold a meeting about it. You don't write a philosophy of navigation. You just reach for what's cheap and available. The same way a shopkeeper stocks the product that's easiest to get, not necessarily the best one on the market. Multiply that decision across 100 ports over several decades, and a habit forms that nobody consciously designed. Red becomes associated with the edges of safe passage, simply because it was the affordable option. Sailors arriving at unfamiliar harbors across different countries started to recognize the same red glow marking the same kind of boundary, night after night, port after port, until the association stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a law of nature. That's layer 1, and it explains where the color red got its head start. But a regional habit among harbor masters doesn't become international law by accident. Something had to convert that habit into a rule that every ship on Earth would be forced to obey. That conversion happened in 1848, when the British Admiralty formalized navigation lights for steam vessels, requiring a red light and a green light along with a white masthead light. A year later, the U.S. Congress extended similar requirements to sailing ships. This is the moment a regional habit became a legal instrument. Compare it to what happened with the QWERTY keyboard. The layout wasn't necessarily the most efficient arrangement of letters that engineers could have designed, but once typewriter manufacturers standardized on it, and once millions of people trained their fingers to it, switching became more costly than keeping it, no matter how good an alternative might have been. Maritime lighting followed the same trajectory. Once the British Admiralty wrote red port, green starboard into regulation, every shipbuilder, every naval academy, and every insurance underwriter had a reason to keep it exactly as written, because deviation now meant liability, confusion, and risk. But codifying the colors only solves half the problem. Two ships still need to know, at a glance, who has to move and who gets to hold their course. This is where the actual genius of the system reveals itself, and it has nothing to do with the colors themselves and everything to do with geometry. Picture two ships approaching each other at an angle in open water. At night, decades before radar existed, each captain needs an instant answer to one question: who yields? The system solves this with pure optics. If you're the captain who sees a red light on the other vessel, you are looking at that ship's port side, which means you're approaching from a position where maritime law assigns you the burden to give way. If instead you see green, you're looking at the other ship's starboard side, and you have the right to hold your course while the other vessel adjusts around you. The color isn't just identifying a side of the hull, it's transmitting a legal instruction across open water, using nothing but the color of light itself, readable from more than a mile away, with no radio and no shared language required. That's not a labeling system. That's a wordless negotiation happening in the dark, settled before either captain says a single word. And once you understand that the color is functioning as a command rather than a label, one more question becomes unavoidable. Why did this specific two-color system, invented for wooden ships lit by oil flames, end up governing machines its 1848 inventors could never have imagined? The answer is what engineers call lock-in, and it's one of the most underrated forces shaping the modern world. When aviation emerged in the early 20th century, engineers needed a way for pilots to judge another aircraft's heading in low visibility, using the same instant, wordless logic sailors already relied on. Rather than inventing something new, they imported the maritime code directly. Red on the left wingtip, green on the right. The system had already proven itself across decades of ocean traffic, so there was no reason to reinvent it. Decades later, when engineers designed uncrewed cargo spacecraft to dock automatically with the International Space Station, they faced an almost identical problem in an almost identical way: two objects converging in the dark, needing an instant way to signal orientation. The solution: red and green position lights. The same two colors chosen because a specific color of glass happened to be cheaper in 19th century England, are now blinking on spacecraft, approaching a station orbiting 250 miles above Earth. Once you see the pattern, it becomes hard to unsee. That red and green pairing isn't a design choice anyone alive today would make from scratch. Modern engineers have far better tools now: LEDs in almost any color, at almost any brightness, visible from almost any distance. If humanity were building a collision avoidance color code today, on a whiteboard, with none of the 19th century constraints, there's a real chance nobody would land on red and green again. But they don't get to start from a whiteboard. They inherit the decision, because switching now would mean retraining every sailor, retrofitting every ship, rewriting international maritime law, and risking exactly the kind of confusion the system was built to prevent in the first place. The cost of change has grown far larger than the cost of just keeping what already works. So here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. How many other systems around you right now are running on a similar kind of inherited logic? A decision nobody currently alive actually made, kept in place only because replacing it would cost more than tolerating it. Consider air traffic control near any major airport. Controllers still use the same red left, green right logic to visually confirm an aircraft's orientation at night as a backup to radar. A redundancy built directly on top of a rule from the age of sail. Consider commercial shipping insurance, where deviation from standard navigation lighting can void a policy outright, because underwriters price risk based on a set of assumptions that has held steady since the 1800s. Even recreational boaters renting a small craft for a weekend on the water are, without realizing it, operating under a legal framework built for wooden ships and oil lanterns. That's the quiet lesson sitting underneath this whole story. The next time you watch a plane's wingtip blink red on one side and green on the other as it descends toward an airport, you're not looking at a modern engineering decision. You're looking at a 19th century harbor master's supply closet, still running the show, still making split-second collision decisions for machines that didn't exist when the rule was written. Here's the detail that reframes everything you just learned. The system was never really about the color red or the color green, or even about ships. It was about designing a rule so simple, so visually unambiguous, that two strangers with no shared language, no radio, and only a few seconds of visibility could make a life-or-death decision correctly, together, without a single word passing between them. That's not a footnote of maritime history. That's one of the earliest working examples of what we would now call a universal protocol, a rule so well designed it outlived the technology, the empire, and the century that produced it. And once you start looking for protocols like this, you start finding them everywhere. Railway tracks still sit at a width chosen partly by the spacing between the wheels of Roman chariots. Standard shipping containers reshaped global trade around one committee's, LATE, 1950s decision on box dimensions. The keyboard under your fingers right now is still arranged the way it was in the age of mechanical typewriter arms, long after the mechanical problem it solved stopped existing. Somewhere in almost every system you rely on daily, there's a fossil like this one. An old decision still quietly running the modern world, invisible precisely because it works. What makes the shiplight story different is the stakes attached to it. A keyboard layout being outdated just slows down your typing. A navigation light system being wrong, even once, in the dark, at sea, ends in wreckage. That's what makes this particular fossil worth understanding. It isn't a curiosity, it's a piece of 19th century risk engineering, still actively preventing collisions tonight, on oceans all over the planet, without a single person thinking about it. If you want to keep finding the hidden decisions running things you use every day, that's exactly what this channel exists to dig up. Subscribe, and next time we'll take apart one of those fossils hiding in something you touch every single day.